I came home from my business trip, exhausted, only to overhear my 4-year-old daughter talking to my wife. "Mom, I like Derek Daddy better of the two," Alice said. "Can I go to the amusement park with him again next time?" Through the crack in the door, I saw my wife, Emily Collins, who had been distant with me for so long, gently flick her finger at Alice''s nose and smile. "Of course, sweetie," she said. "He''s your real daddy." Derek was Emily''s first love. The paternity test results came back. I smoked several cigarettes before I could bring myself to look at the paper. It wasn't until my secretary, Henry, knocked and entered that I snapped out of my daze. He wrinkled his nose at the strong smoke in the office. "Morgan, we secured the project from Apex Group," he said, holding a thick stack of documents. "Set it down," I said. Still half in a fog. "I'll sign it later." Henry nodded and left. I wiped my face and slowly opened the envelope containing the test results. The conclusion was clear: Alice, the daughter I had adored for 4 years, wasn't mine. The dust settled. Strangely, I didn't feel the turmoil or grief I'd expected. Instead, a strange calmness spread through me. When I thought back on it, the signs had been there for years. A few years ago, Emily, who had always been cold towards me, suddenly surprised me with a candle at dinner. We drank aged wine, and in the heat of the moment, I forgot to bring a condom. But Emily, who had always disliked going without, didn't scold me. Instead, she calmly said, "I''am in my safe period." After that, she became unexpectedly gentle towards me, and I was taken aback. What surprised me even more was that, despite never wanting children, she became pregnant. And then she told me she wanted to keep the baby. When the time came to give birth, Emily had complications. I swore I would never let her go through that again. Looking back now, I realize how foolish I was. Emily knew exactly whose child it was. She only wanted to have Derek's child. If I hadn't returned early from my business trip last week and overheard Alice's innocent remark about having 2 dads, I'd probably still be in the dark. Emily and I had the typical business marriage. Her family's company hit a rough patch, and they came to my parents for help. The only difference was, I'd secretly been in love with Emily for years. I always knew that Emily didn't love me. She had an ex from abroad, her first love, with whom she broke up long before we married. She married me solely to solve her family's immediate crisis. After our marriage, she remained indifferent to me. I thought I could win her heart with sincerity, that if I waited long enough, she would eventually feel my love. After Alice was born, we grew closer. I thought I had touched her heart, but reality slapped me hard in the face. 5 years of marriage. Alice knew she had another dad. But I had no idea. To her, I must have seemed laughable. My phone buzzed. It was rare for Emily to text me. "Henry told me you're back from your trip. Why haven't you come home? Alice has been asking for you." I let out a bitter smile. I'd gone home last week to surprise the 2 of them, but in the end, the surprise was on me. When something like this happens, no man can keep his composure. I didn't want to argue with Emily in front of Alice. So, I quietly left the house and moved into an apartment closer to the office. It had been a week, and now she's finally noticed I've returned. Yet that night, when I was furious, I still sent her a message. "I'm busy lately. It's more convenient to stay in an apartment near the office." Emily didn't even read it. Or if she saw the notification, she just swiped it away without a second thought. Thinking about it, I suddenly felt drained. Was it my mistake to force feelings into this business marriage? This time, I didn't respond to Emily's message. She had never been patient with me, and when she saw I hadn't replied, she quickly called. The moment the call connected, her voice came through, sharp with questioning. "Marcus Morgan, didn't you see my message?" "Sorry. I was working late." "Working late? Do you even remember you / a married man? Alice has been asking for you every day. How could you do this to her?" I fell silent. Honestly, I wanted to ask Emily if she remembered that she was a married woman too, and if she remembered that Alice was her child with another man. But looking at the family photo on my desk, the three of us together, something inside me held back. "Alice is sick and wants cake. Get some and bring it to the hospital," she said coldly before hanging up. Then came a location ping. I thought of Alice's sweet, innocent face. The way she called me daddy. My heart softened. After all, she was the daughter I'd raised with my own hands. So, I went out and bought the red velvet cake and chocolate cake Alice loved, then headed to the hospital. Just as I reached the door of her room, I heard Alice's cheerful voice. "Derek Daddy, Alice was very brave today. I took my medicine and got my shots." I froze, peering inside. There, standing next to Alice, was a young man in a white coat, smiling gently. Derek, Emily's first love. He affectionately ruffled Alice / hair. "My little girl is so good," he said. And Emily stood by, watching the interaction with a soft, loving smile. In 5 years of marriage, I had never seen that look on her face. The three of them were so harmonious together, as if they were the real family. It was true, if you looked at it from a biological standpoint, these three were truly a family. A heavy weight settled in my chest, like a thick cloud pressing down. I felt like a fool for rushing to the hospital with cakes in hand. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. I stood at the door, unsure whether to go in or just leave. It was Derek who noticed me first. He raised an eyebrow behind his gold-rimmed glasses. "Marcus Morgan?" Hearing my name, Emily's once warm expression instantly froze. She turned to look at me, her gaze cold. "Why are you only here now?" Her eyes briefly flicked to the cakes in my hands before she pursed her lips. "Derek already brought Alice her dinner," she said. "So, the cake I had waited in a long line to buy for Alice, is just going to be ignored?" Emily knew exactly how hard it was to get cakes from that bakery. Derek stepped in with a smile, trying to smooth things over. "Alice didn't eat much today. She can have this for her after-dinner dessert." The moment Alice heard after-dinner dessert, she clapped her hands in excitement. "I want a after-dinner dessert." Emily shook her head disapprovingly. "No, you can't. After brushing your teeth, you can't eat anything. Otherwise, you'll get cavities." But Derek countered. "She's still young, growing. Let her eat a little more. I think Alice is too thin." Emily sighed, looking at Derek. "You spoil her too much." Alice, being clever, immediately caught on to the change in her mother's tone and cheered. I had already stepped into the room, but I still felt like an outsider, unable to insert myself into the conversation. Seeing Emily had relented, Derek smiled and reached for the cake bag in my hands. "Marcus Morgan, hand it over." He said it so matter-of-factly, as if he were the one in charge of the house, as if he were Emily's husband. Derek's gaze held a clear challenge. He knew full well that if I had been the one to suggest such a thing to Emily, she would have never agreed. When it came to disciplining Alice, she wouldn't allow me to have a say. A surge of anger rose uncontrollably inside me. Since I walked into this room, Emily hadn't given me a single friendly glance. Derek had been deliberately provoking me. And Alice, she hadn't even called me daddy once. I began to question myself. Had I been too submissive in the past? Had I allowed Emily to treat me this way? Not only had I been raising her first love Derek's child, but now she didn't even try to hide it in front of me. Had she really thought I was someone she could walk all over? I stared at Derek's hand, his fingers long and sharp. Reaching for the cake, and a cold laugh escaped me. Without a second thought, I tossed the cake into the trash can. No need. If already had dinner, what's the point of a after-dinner dessert? Derek and Emily both froze. The first to react was Alice. Seeing the cake she had been promised thrown into the trash, she started crying and throwing a tantrum. I want a after-dinner dessert. Daddy's so mean. I hate Daddy. Emily snapped at me. Marcus, what are you doing? Derek quickly scooped Alice up and tried to calm her. Alice, sweetheart, it's okay, I'll go get you more. Don't cry, okay? Alice sobbed in his arms, waving her little hands in the air. Daddy's bad. I don't want Marcus Daddy, I only want Derek Daddy. Emily's voice was icy as she spoke. Alice is already sick, and you're still treating her like this? Do you even know how to be a father? For the first time, I looked at Emily and found her normally graceful, cold face utterly repulsive. I don't know how to be a father. Isn't there one right here? She instinctively furrowed her brows, ready to snap at me, but as our eyes locked, she froze. You three are a family. After all. It's better that way. Don't push the role of father onto me. I left those words hanging in the air, and Emily's face turned ashen. I turned and walked away, but to my surprise, Emily actually followed me out. At the elevator, she caught up to me, grabbing my arm and breathing heavily. Marcus, what was that about just now? What's going on with you? She demanded. I stopped, turned to face her, and countered, what about you? Are you feeling guilty? She was momentarily stunned, then sneered. Guilty? I am asking what you were saying just now. At this point. She was still refusing to admit anything, still trying to paint me as the fool. Let's get a divorce, I said suddenly, feeling utterly drained. I should have brought it up the moment I got the paternity test results, instead of holding on to hope for Alice and foolishly thinking Emily might still have some soft spot for me. Coming here today had only been an exercise in humiliation. Emily froze. Divorce? Why are you bringing that up out of nowhere? She asked, looking bewildered. I spoke quietly, but firmly. Emily, you might not know this. But I understand you more than you think. If you hadn't done anything wrong, if you had a clear conscience, you wouldn't be chasing me down. Her face drained of color in an instant. I could feel her fingers trembling slightly where she had grabbed my arm. I smiled and shook my head, then pulled away, stepping into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw her lips move. She seemed to want to say something, but the words never came. I returned to my downtown Los Angeles apartment and quickly packed up my things. In 5 years of marriage, I'd accumulated so little for myself that one suitcase was all it took to hold my belongings. Pulling my suitcase back to my apartment, I realized Emily had called me several times. When I didn't pick up, she sent several messages. Marcus, did someone tell you something? Are you serious about the divorce? You need to understand, our marriage represents more than just us, it affects both the Collins and Morgan families. I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. I had hoped that when she followed me out, it was because she felt at least a little guilty. But no, she was just worried that I had learned something that might jeopardize the business alliance between our two families. But why should I care? When I married her, I used the power of the Morgan family to save the failing Collins family from bankruptcy. For the past years, I had even made concessions in our business dealings with the Collins family, all because I loved her. And what had I received in return? A wife who only gave me a kind look when it suited her. And a child who didn't even belong to me. I didn't respond to Emily's messages. Instead, I contacted my lawyer, asking him to draft a divorce agreement as soon as possible. The lawyer worked fast, sending the agreement to me the next day. I skimmed through it quickly, no major issues, and sent it directly to Emily. It wasn't long before her phone rang. It was almost comical. In 5 years of marriage, she had contacted me less than she had in the past 2 days. "Marcus, are you serious about this?" Emily's voice was sharp with anger. I could tell she hadn't expected me to go through with it. "As you can see, I'm not joking. Let me tell you, once we divorce, you won't get a chance to regret it," she said, her tone final, as though she was certain I would regret my decision. Despite having already decided to move on, her words still struck a chord. It was almost like she knew I loved her. Yet, knowing that, she still chose to trample on my feelings. I tilted my head back and blinked. "Emily, how about I step aside and let Derek have you?" I asked, my voice calm. "What nonsense are you talking? You're really annoying." Furious, she hung up without another word. I had expected Emily to sign the divorce agreement quickly, but to my surprise, I hadn't heard back from her. The weekend, my parents unexpectedly invited me over for dinner. I figured I should let them know about the divorce, so I decided to go. But as soon as I stepped into the house, I found Emily's parents chatting happily with mine. Emily, on the other hand, was in the kitchen with the maid, a rare sight. Alice, who had been playing with her toys, looked up when she saw me. Her face lighting up with a smile as she called out, "Daddy." Her voice broke the conversation in the room. Both my parents and the Collins couple turned to look at me. At that moment, I understood exactly what was going on. Emily had probably mentioned the divorce to them and asked her parents to mediate. Sure enough, just as I sat down in the living room after changing my shoes, my dad immediately instructed the maid to take Alice away. "Emily said you want a divorce? How old are you now? You've got a child. Why bring this up all of a sudden?" My dad spoke first, his tone stern. Probably assuming I'd been irresponsible. The Collins couple didn't dare initiate the topic, as they had depended on our Morgan family for years. But with my dad starting, Mrs. Collins quickly chimed in, "Marcus, when we entrusted Emily to you, we had complete trust in you. Over the years, we've never heard of any problems between you two. Why are you suddenly talking about divorce? Is there someone else involved?" "Marcus, as a man, I understand you," Mr. Collins added, "but between you and Emily, it's not that simple. Love is one thing. But marriage is a union of two families. Let's sit down and talk this through. Divorce isn't something to take lightly, especially for the child. You shouldn't rush into it." Mr. Collins tried to sound understanding, but his eyes were full of disapproval. The only one silent was my mother, though her disapproving gaze was just as clear. I didn't know what Emily had told them, but clearly, both sets of parents believed that I was the one at fault. It seemed like this dinner was no longer happening. I had originally planned to part on good terms with Emily, but at that moment, I suddenly didn't feel like sparing her any face. Just how much confidence had my past actions given her to make her think she could bring both families together like this? Was she really not afraid that I would expose everything? Tell Emily to stop pretending to be busy and come out to hear why I am so determined to get a divorce. It didn't take long for Emily to emerge from the kitchen, wiping her hands. She was wearing a mustard yellow dress, one I had bought for her when we first got married. At the time, she hadn't liked the color. In fact, she never wore it, not once. Over the years. But today, she put it on, her intentions so transparent I could see right through them. See, she knows exactly what could make me happy or satisfy me. But in the past 5 years, Emily hadn't done a single thing like that. Only now, when I said I wanted a divorce, did she rush to put on this dress, trying to imply she was willing to back down. But deep down, she /s too proud. She couldn't /t bring herself to apologize, so she tried to use this gesture as a way to make me give her an out. At this moment, I felt nothing but resignation and even a little frustration. Does she really think I am so foolish, so lacking in self-respect? I gave a bitter laugh, then pulled out the paternity test that I had read over countless times and placed it on the table. This is why I want a divorce. The moment Emily saw the words paternity test on the cover, all the color drained from her face. She looked up at me in disbelief, her lips trembling. When did you? The change in both our parents was immediate. My mother was the first to grab the test, flipping to the last page. When she saw the results, she clutched her chest and collapsed onto the sofa. The impact of this paternity test was like a nuclear bomb. The Collins family didn't even dare to touch it. So, I don't think they're s anything more to discuss. 5 years, and I believe I have been more than patient, I said softly. Then I turned to Emily, who was now pale and trembling, barely able to stand. Sign the divorce papers. If you really care about Alice, you should take her back to her real father. Emily was speechless. Mr. Collins, his face ashen, slapped Emily across the face with a force that made the room go silent. Tears immediately welled up in Emily /s eyes. Mrs. Collins, full of concern, rushed to grab Mr. Collins. Why do you have to hit her? Can't you just talk to her calmly? Mr. Collins shook her off angrily. It's because of you she's this spoiled. She's embarrassed the Collins family enough, and you're still defending her? My mother opened her mouth, but Mr. Collins' words cut her off. I stood up. The facts are clear now, Mr. and Mrs. Collins. You should take her and Alice and go. Whatever you need to discuss, do it at home. As for my parents, I still need to explain things to them. Marcus, Mr. Collins' face was ashen. But my tone was firm. If they wanted to discipline their daughter, they could do it at home. They didn't need to put on this show here. Emily stood frozen, as if she couldn't believe how everything had turned out. Mr. Collins grabbed her roughly. Let's go. Why are you still standing there, embarrassing yourself? Mrs. Collins, too frightened to intervene with the enraged Mr. Collins, could only silently follow behind, holding Alice. In the end, we didn't even finish the meal. After calming my parents down, I headed back to the apartment, only to find Emily sitting on the floor in front of my door, her hair a tangled mess. The moment I decided to divorce, I changed the lock code here. She couldn't get in and had to wait for me outside. Hearing my footsteps, she looked up at me. Marcus, are you happy now? My father has never raised a hand to me my whole life, and because of you, he's the first time to strike me. Emily slowly stood up, her mustard-yellow dress making her pale face look even whiter. In the dim hallway light, I could clearly see the slap mark on her cheek. It looked pretty bad. But what did she want by showing me the slap mark? Was she hoping I'd feel sorry for her? I only found it ironic. I don't get it. How do you still have the nerve to come here? It was the first time in 5 years of marriage that I spoke to her so harshly. Clearly, Emily couldn't take it. Her eyes turned red. I opened the door and walked inside. Emily tried to follow me, but I blocked her at the threshold. Sorry, I already told you I want a divorce. This place, it's not really for you anymore. She bit her lip, her voice shaking. Do you really have to be so heartless? I looked at her seriously and said, you had a child with another man, told the child she had her real father, and you two kept it from me, treating me like a fool. Who's being heartless here? Emily was speechless. I know you didn't marry me out of love, but why couldn't you even do the basic thing, be loyal? I don't understand why you're here now. Derek is back, and Alice knows he's her real father. I'm divorcing you to make way for Derek, so you three can be a family again. Isn't that a happy ending for everyone? No, that's not it. Marcus. Please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I'll ask you one thing, is Alice Derek's child? She looked absolutely mortified, but she still nodded slightly. Then hurry up and sign the divorce papers. Otherwise, I'll file for a lawsuit. Don't say I didn't warn you about not showing the Collins family any respect. I said it coldly and shut the door on her. I'm not leaving unless you're willing to hear my side of the story. Emily sent me that message and sat back down at my door. I was getting frustrated. What is she doing? Trying to win me back? How laughable. I didn't want to deal with her, so I went to my study to focus on my own things. Late into the night, the doorbell rang. Emily was outside, crying. Marcus, I know I was wrong. Please open the door. Let me explain. I'll make it clear to you. I pretended I didn't hear. Marcus, can't you really give me one more chance? I had never seen Emily, who had always been so distant, break down like this, crying and causing a scene at my door. Other residents have already complained about the noise. After thinking for a moment, I dialed Derek's number. Take Emily away. Derek arrived quickly and, half coaxing, half carrying, took the sobbing Emily away. The next day, Derek asked to meet me. He was here to play the mediator for Emily. Sitting in the cafe, I absent-mindedly stirred my spoon in the cup and sneered lightly. I thought that once I left, you two would be able to patch things up. Derek gave a wry smile. At least before you showed up at the hospital that day. I thought so too. He began to ramble on about his past with Emily. One was a small-town guy who had fought tooth and nail to get a chance to study at Oxford. The other was a pampered princess, someone who had everything handed to her just by waving a hand. She couldn't understand his worries about an uncertain future, but at the same time, she didn't want to hold him back from reaching for something better. So, they made a pact, 5 years. After 5 years, he would return. But then, in the 4th year, the Collins family ran into trouble. Emily had no choice but to marry you. She's an idealistic girl when it comes to love. She felt like she betrayed the relationship first, and she's always been blaming herself, feeling guilty toward me. I let out a soft laugh. So, is that your excuse for getting her pregnant and then dumping it all on me? Derek's expression darkened. No matter how glorified, how pure and beautiful he painted their past, the filth behind it couldn't be covered up by these words. The moment I heard Emily tell Alice that Derek was her real father, I carefully pieced together the timeline. Alice was a little over 4, meaning she was conceived around the time of our wedding. The night before the wedding, Emily had gone out for some single party with her best friend. She had sent me a short video to let me know she was okay. Derek was in it. The first time I officially met Derek was at the wedding. Emily openly introduced him as her first love, even having us add each other on contact information. After attending our wedding, Derek immediately flew back to the UK. Aside from congratulating me on Alice's birth on social media, I had barely exchanged a word with him. It was precisely because of Emily's open attitude that I never had any suspicions. Perhaps I had struck a nerve, as Derek took a quick sip of his coffee to cover it up. I suddenly asked him, "You clearly don't want to be here playing the mediator. Why pretend to care and ask me to meet?" A flicker of discomfort crossed Derek's eyes. "Because Emily told me last night that she realized she's in love with you." I froze. She only realized she loved me after I filed for divorce? Don't believe me? Derek shot back. His voice tinged with frustration. You think I'd go out of my way to provoke you? It's because I've noticed she's been bringing up your name more and more lately. Oh, so her love means being cold and distant to me, secretly cheating behind my back, and expecting me to raise your child? I couldn't help but laugh. Emily has a lot of pride. Maybe she subconsciously can't accept that she betrayed her first love and fell for you. That's why she's been deliberately distant, trying to hide her feelings. I glanced at my watch and suddenly realized I was wasting time. I had nothing left to say to Derek and his defense of Emily. Forget it. Tell Emily this for me: I won't live with a woman who's been unfaithful. She doesn't deserve it. Derek shot up from his chair. Marcus. You're crossing the line. At that moment, the woman who had been sitting behind Derek, wearing a mask, stood up. It was Emily. Her face was pale, and her eyes were brimming with tears. Marcus, you say I'm an unfaithful woman. Do you really despise me that much? I know I made a mistake all those years ago, but we've been through so much. Can't you, for the sake of our past, forgive me just this once? Emily. Derek pleaded, his voice desperate. Look at me. Marcus is insulting you, and you're still begging him? I nodded. Yeah, you've finally reunited with your first love, and Alice can be with her real father. Why tear them apart? Tears began to fall from Emily's eyes as she choked. It's all my fault. Alice, you don't have to accept her, I'll make it up to you. We can have other children, I'll have another one for you, Emily. Derek stared at her in disbelief. How could you say something like that? Alice will be heartbroken. I felt disgusted. After discovering you've had me raising another man's daughter for 4 years, your idea of making it up to me is to have another child? Ha! I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Emily, please face reality, I don't need you. Finally, the pain was evident on her face. I turned and walked away. Marcus. Emily called after me, but Derek pulled her back. Emily, give up. You've seen it now, there's only one person who has loved you unwaveringly, and that's me. Derek*'s interference made me lose all hope of Emily signing the divorce agreement. I decided to take the matter into my own hands and instructed my lawyer to file for divorce. The commotion was significant, and the Collins family, unable to bear the shame, pressured Emily into signing the divorce papers. A few months later, I finally received the divorce certificate. Emily showed up. She had lost a lot of weight and no longer had that once proud, confident energy. As we walked out of the courthouse, she hesitated before softly asking, Marcus, could we have a meal together? I shook my head. Forget it. Let's just pretend we don't know each other next time we meet. She bit her lip and couldn't hold back the tears. I walked past her and got into my car, catching a glimpse of Derek holding Alice's hand as they walked by. He pulled Alice into his arms. What was Emily regretting now? When I gave my all to her, she was thinking only of Derek, convinced that our marriage was a betrayal of her pure love for him. But now, as I severed my feelings for her and filed for divorce, she suddenly couldn't let go. Ignoring the man who had been by her side all along, Derek. Did Emily even understand love? What she loved was just the illusion she had created in her mind. First, it was Derek, and now it was me. She would never learn to cherish the person in front of her. After the divorce, my mom began looking for suitable partners for me again. I wasn't opposed to it, but finding the right person for marriage wasn't so easy. It wasn't long before Emily found out about this and, late one night, called me. She didn't speak when I picked up, she just cried uncontrollably. After a couple of times, I blocked her. 6 months later, I met Susie, the vice president of a business partner company, Top Group. We hit it off immediately. After dating for a few months, we decided to get married. But Emily somehow found out that I was marrying Susie. She completely lost it. Late one night, she showed up drunk outside my new home with Susie. I was too annoyed and had Derek come to take her away. Thankfully, Susie was very understanding. She knew all the history behind my marriage with Emily and didn't say a word about it. After the wedding, I took Susie on a honeymoon to the UK. When we returned to the US, Derek came to see me, looking pale. He said, "Emily has decided to marry me." I nodded. "Congratulations." He forced a bitter smile. "She only agreed to marry me because she found out you were on a honeymoon with your new wife. She's just doing it out of spite." I sighed. I patted Derek's shoulder. His face was full of uncertainty about the future. I could only wish him good luck. I ran into Emily again at the obstetrics and gynecology department at the hospital. Susie, my wife, was pregnant. And I was accompanying her for her prenatal checkup. By coincidence, we bumped into Derek and Emily. Emily was ahead of us. Susie had just discovered she was 3 months pregnant, but Emily/'s belly was already showing. Derek was carefully supporting her. But Emily no longer had that gentle look in her eyes when she used to look at Derek. "If you think you too busy, then go do your thing. Why are you still putting on a show here during my checkup? ISN/T this your child too? Back when I was pregnant with Alice." Marcus. Hearing my name mentioned like that at a time like this made me feel uncomfortable. So I quickly grabbed Susie and steered her in another direction. At Christmas, my mom mentioned it. That Emily from the Collins family, she/s with her first love now, but things aren't going too well. I saw her shopping alone at the mall, big belly and all, dragging Alice around. Alice was being a brat, crying and yelling, and she just hit her right there in front of everyone. Poor Alice. I almost cried for her. Don/T be confused now. The baby Susie is carrying is your real granddaughter. My mom shot me a reproachful look. Am I really that clueless? Ironically, that very night, Derek asked me out for a drink. I pretended I didn't see the message. But my phone kept buzzing. I finally picked it up and, to my surprise, Derek was drunk and had sent me several voice messages. Is it easier to fall in love than to stay in love? I thought that by getting Alice back and reconnecting with Emily, the three of us could start fresh, but why has it turned out like this? Emily doesn't understand my job. I'm a pediatrician, my work is demanding, but she always compares me to you. She says you were busy too, but you always managed to be there for her when she needed you. Then he started crying. Susie heard the voice messages and was shocked. You're still in contact with him? Derek's a cheater, and you're friends with him? How can you be so forgiving? I calmly put my phone away and pulled her into my arms. She suddenly realized. You didn't do this on purpose, did you? I smiled. How could it not be on purpose? I deliberately kept Derek's contact information. Occasionally chatting with him and keeping him updated. I also made sure to flaunt my loving relationship with Susie in front of him. In contrast, his marriage with Emily wasn't as happy as he had imagined. After all, Derek didn't have the family wealth I had, and to support Emily, he had to rely on his own efforts. Originally, Derek had come back from studying in the UK with great academic achievements, and he was one of the hospital's most promising talents. But to take care of Emily, he had compromised many times, giving up several opportunities. And the hospital had started to lose faith in him. Without the backing from higher-ups, he was stuck, and the best he could do was become a department head. He often vented to me, as if I were his confidant. Sometimes, I couldn't help but laugh. Derek said that after Emily got pregnant, he couldn't manage alone, so he brought his parents to help care for Alice and the pregnant Emily. Living so close to his mother-in-law caused many tensions. When Emily was still my wife, my mom didn't like her cold attitude, but she never complained about her. Now that things were like this, it was impossible to remain at ease. Seeing her situation now, I was actually pleased. Don't call me petty. As for Derek, he wasn't entirely innocent either. Who could be shameless enough to sleep with his ex-girlfriend the night before her wedding? He clearly knew Alice was his daughter, and had no problem laughing at me and Emily together. So now, why shouldn't I laugh at his and Emily's misfortune? Susie laughed at me. You're something else, you pretend to be all magnanimous, fooling everyone. People say you /re-naive, but I think you're the one with the devious mind. The next year, Susie gave birth to twins. Later, I heard that Emily had a huge fight with Derek's mother and ran back to her own family. Apparently, Derek's mother fainted from the argument and, when she woke up, forced Derek to divorce. Now they were talking about divorce. The Collins family wasn't a pushover either and immediately hired people to stir trouble at Derek's hospital, causing him to be suspended. His life had fallen apart. After sending him a new family photo, I deleted Derek from my contacts. Seeing them in such a miserable state finally let the pent-up anger inside me dissipate.